I'm not a parent yet, so I often try not to be overly critical of parents, but I do think that giving a 12-year-old unfettered, unsupervised access to smartphones and social media is a terrible idea. I think 12 is way too young. And I know that there are people with, 8 and 9-year-olds and 8-year-olds and so on with unfettered access to all of these platforms. And honestly, I think that's a bad idea. I mean, as someone who spends a lot of time on social media myself, truly, I don't think that most adults are great at handling it and dealing with it, not just from, that aspect of grooming and predators, but just, people's mental well-being and ability to deal with trolls and deal with hate and deal with backlash and some of the content that's out there. I mean, there's so much of it. I mean, I would
Well, I,
think
I
that,
agree,
yeah.
and to your point, and I think you're spot on here. To your point, Zuby, kids watch what their parents and other adults in the house do. So if the parent is conducting themselves in a jakey way online, the kids are going to take their cues from that. I mean, you have to lead by example here. And so if you're up at 4 in the morning doing something that looks suspicious, the kids are going to understand that and find it acceptable. So it's, look, it's a lot of responsibility. And a lot of kids will spend their entire lives online and never get propositioned by a predator. I get that. And you could argue that the vast majority of adult on children sexual assaults take place with somebody who is known to them, an incestuous type of thing. But having said that, there is a lot of danger online, and not just from sexual predators, financial predators. There
Yes.
are all kinds of extortion plots out there, these sex extortion plots, and we're working on a number of stories along those lines, and people who are, selling puppies that don't exist online. I mean, it's you just have to be very careful across the board. If you don't know that person in real life, then you don't know them just because you've met them online. When I was a kid, parents said, "Don't talk to strangers." Well, that was great advice then. It's great advice now. The problem is the guy who's a stranger on Wednesday is so adept at grooming children that he won't be a stranger by Friday. And I see this when I do the podcast. We go back, the Predators I've Caught podcast, we go back over these old cases or previous cases. And when I do the investigations, it's a little bit on the fly. I mean, I have transcripts, I have information, I have background, but you've got a lot going on at the same time. So in the podcast, I go back over these cases and I immerse myself in them. And I see this pattern of grooming in the transcripts. It's almost like some of these guys go to a class someplace online to learn how to break down the traditional barriers in society between adults and children. It's stunning how
Yes.
it follows a template.
On that topic, I think in the last 2 years, something that's really risen up in the public consciousness. I mean, you just used the term grooming, and I'm sure you're aware that that term, grooming, groomers, is a conversation that's been, that's a word that's been popping up a lot recently, even
Sure.
with some of the things that are being taught in schools, some of the things that adults are promoting, targeting children and youth online, whether it's with certain ideologies or things about sex, things about gender, things about sexuality, things that are not age appropriate, and
Well, there's
things which,
the recruitment for terrorists,
yeah,
all kinds of
that
stuff.
too, yeah, that too. But I think a lot of the grooming behavior that people are calling out is stuff that's actually happening within institutions that are typically trusted and respected, right? You've got all these weird videos of teachers on TikTok and out there who are teaching kids about really age inappropriate things and who are promoting it as if it's some sort of greater good. So, what are your thoughts on that whole phenomenon? Because it's not something that I think, I mean, when I was in school, couple decades ago, it's not something that people were overly concerned about. But I
Well,
think with,
imagine how it is for me. I
yeah,
mean, my kids are now 31 to 21, and so they're out of the danger zone, except for the financial predator stuff, I suppose, or
mhm,
any other scams that adults are potentially targeted by. But my first computer class was as a senior in high school, where we had to program Fortran cards to run through what passed then as a computer. We had no idea how this would affect our lives, or even as a journalist in the early days, we didn't. Why would you ever need a computer? We got a typewriter. So, this has been a very steep learning curve for those of us of a certain age and certain generation. And it has opened up all kinds of access, not just with predators and children or predators and victims, but just being able to expose children to any individual's ideology or value set that you may not share. And so, again, it comes down to the parent as a gatekeeper, I think. And you can do this without being overly protective or onerous or, not letting your kid have a computer or a smartphone. But you do have to have a constant dialogue, I think. And I'm not pretending to be, parent of the year or anything like that. It's just common sense stuff based upon what I've seen and having interviewed parents whose children have fallen prey to this stuff and children who have fallen prey. I remember in the early predator investigations 15, 16 years ago, we had a group of a dozen fourth, fifth graders, maybe a little older, maybe sixth, seventh graders, middle schoolers. And I had them all on risers sitting there. And I said, how many of you, show of hands, have been approached by an adult online you didn't know and it made you feel uncomfortable? Almost every one of those dozen kids raised their hand. And then I said, another show of hands, how many of you told your parents? One hand goes up out of the dozen. So they didn't want to upset their parents by telling them what had happened to them online. And so the message is you have to say, look, if somebody does something that makes you uncomfortable, you need to tell me. And again, it goes back to this best line of defense is a good education. And at least if something makes them feel uncomfortable or strange, they will feel okay telling you about it, and then you can take action.
Why do you think why do you think such a small percentage of them would have felt comfortable telling their
Because they were
parents about it?
afraid. I asked that question, and that's an excellent question, Zuby. I asked that question. They said they were afraid their parents were going to take the internet away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's actually a really interesting reply.
that was telling to me.
Yeah.
And so I hope the situation has improved since I've done that interview. I suppose it'd be great to go back and do it. About 4 or 5 years ago, we did a piece for Crime Watch Daily when I was hosting that show and reporting for it, a syndicated crime show. And we had a therapist in one room asking kids questions, and I was in the next room with a monitor with their parents listening to the answers. And there was a shocking disconnect between what the parents thought the kids would say and what the kids actually said. And it was an eye-opening experiment because it was a lesson to parents that, look, everybody's busy. Everybody's got their own drama, but you need to sit down and say, look, these guys don't have any barriers anymore. It doesn't matter if you lock your door. It doesn't matter whether you have a security camera. They can get right through on the computer, and you better beware and you better have that conversation.
I know there are a lot of parents who listen to this podcast. So what practical precautions or advice would you give to a parent who's listening to this, who is somewhat aware of this or deeply aware of it and is concerned about the online safety of their own children? Are there some practical steps that you would explicitly recommend?
There are a number of software programs out there where you can monitor your kid's activity on the cell phone or on the computer. If they give away, for instance, your home address, home phone numbers, it'll send a text to you, and that's all very easily available. But I think, beyond that, it goes back to what we were discussing before, Zuby, which is you just have to have this open line of communication. They need to feel that they're safe in coming to you and saying this happened. You need to feel confident enough in your parenting skills to say, look, there are people out there who will try to trick you. There are people out there who don't see the world like your mom and dad do, who have a different set of values, who might try to co-opt you or take advantage of you in some way. And just because a guy or a gal online says they're, a surfer dude or chick from San Diego and they're 15, 16 years old, doesn't mean that's who they are. They could be a fat 60-year-old in his mother's basement wearing his underwear surrounded by empty pizza boxes. You can be a little clever telling the story to get their attention. And in my experience, that sort of thing resonates. with kids, as opposed, you can get all the software, you can do all this stuff. I still think, the software can break down, the software can be circumvented, all that stuff, people can get around it. There are workarounds. The best way to do it is to educate your kids and make sure they know that you're not going to punish them for coming to you and telling you that something weird happened online.